Welcome to the DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me, as always, is my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DBS Films. So today we are picking up on part 2 of The Haunting of the Whitlow House. If you haven't listened to that part, I would highly recommend it. We kind of go into the beginning elements of the screenwriting process, also what it was like filming it. So we're making our way through the movie now. We have our downbeats, which again are some of the harder ones, and then we had the scares going. So this is kind of a good one. Again, all of our actors did absolutely fantastic jobs. And being in front of the camera myself and seeing how awkward I am, I have nothing but the most respect for actors. But I will say another thing that's good with doing your first day one scares and your day one montages and stuff is you really want to almost give them the ability to ease into a role. Just because, our first scene with Tyler when he was scaring people, he was just coming off really kind of aggressive and like it was just very loud. I remember like it was peaking and whatnot, and it almost took him a little bit to settle down. So I think as an indie director and an indie producer, you should almost understand that you're kind of going to have almost this bell curve with actors, and you can talk on it a little bit more of what you see. But I feel like at first they're kind of a little bit frigid because you're new on set. You kind of get to that peak where you're feeling it, where you're flowing, and then unfortunately with it being an indie set, you just kind of get burnt out and tired. Is that kind of what you see? And again, absolute credit to every single person we worked with. They're all absolutely fantastic. We were lucky to have any of these actors in our movies, but I think it's just the nature of overworking and what you can experience in an indie set.
Yeah, so our shoots now are 7 days. And what you said, I've seen it over 9 movies now. The first day, everyone's just, there's adrenaline, there's nerves. Some actors may have theater experience, so they're taught to be just big and bold, which doesn't necessarily translate very well, on film. So there's like, you just kind of gotta, ease into it. It's like a warm up. You got to get them going. But usually, they start to, get going pretty quickly. Day 2 is a little bit better. Day 3, 4, and 5, and 6 are really the sweet spot. So if you can really get some of your heavier dialogue stuff in there, those are where, they're kind of tired. They're a little bit worn. They don't really care as much as in like care what other people think of them. Obviously they care about the production, but their ego, isn't as high as it was, in the beginning of the film. And so those are good times to really get the high dialogue stuff going, the heavier acting scenes going. By the time you get to day 7, they've been up for 13, 14 hours every single day, running, acting terrified, doing a lot of emotional stuff, doing a lot of physical stuff. And I always say, like, listen, guys, you guys are going to be, working for 16 hours a day. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Not a problem. Very few people, can stay awake for 16 hours, 6 days straight and just give something, their complete all to give a film, as much emotional and physical attention as they do for 16 hours straight is very, very, very difficult. And sometimes you don't have water. Sometimes you don't have AC. So, my advice would be do some easier stuff day 1. And then at that night, if you can try and get an intro or climax or some of that stuff done, I'd recommend that. Day 2 should definitely be your intro and your climax so you can really focus on that stuff. Then 3, 4, 5 should be your heavy acting stuff, a lot of dialogue stuff because they're going to be warmed up. Day 6, they're going to start to get tired. So if you can find some stuff that doesn't require as much energy, it'd be good. And then day 7 should really be, looking at your edit, trying to figure out, what scenes and what shots you want to pick up, what scenes and shots you want to redo, and then just anything else, pickups, inserts, anything like that. I would schedule it for day 7. So then you can pop champagne, when you say cut on the final shot.
I love the champagne. So, biggest thing that we can recommend, honestly, now, schedule an extra day. Schedule one day extra that you don't need to do anything, that you're like, I don't need this day. Because guess what? We've done that ever since Whitlow, and we've needed the day every single time. Every single time we needed that day. And, we always are like, well, we'll finish it and we'll be able to watch the rough together and we can pop champagne and celebrate. And usually what ends up happening with the champagne pop is like at the last one, we popped the champagne at 8 a.m. and we had to get out at 9. And I mean, no one like, I think I took a swig of it. And then I was like, oh, that's right. I've been up for, 28 hours now. So the best thing you can do is give yourself a complete extra day. If you're editing on set, then ideally you can use it to improve the things that want to work on. But I would say 9 times out of 10, you will need that day, especially if you're new, especially if this is your first indie film. Schedule an extra day where you have nothing shot, you will use it. I guarantee you. And again, you gotta think of managing that. I think we always pick really, really good crews. And I think we kind of, we understand how to work with actors and whatnot. We always try and make them feel very comfortable and happy on set. Cause like, I mean, it happens all the time. You hear in big movie studios, people just walk off. And, these are people. And like, if someone gets pushed to a breaking point and, worst things worse is if you're in the seat of a director and whatever, they not that they lose respect for you, but like if you create conflict yourself, like I would say me and my brother are both very conflict averse people. There's not much you can do to us that's going to make us upset or really kind of trigger us. And we're going to be the ones on set that are like ready to go and do it just because we have the experience with it. We understand it. But I think there's a lot of stories that we've seen in a lot of movies and that, you just hear in both big and small, where you put people in this pressure cooker and it might not work. And the thing is what's crazy is you will literally see someone go from on edge to perfectly fine if you just give them like an hour or so of like, we do something different or we get this scene done or we do this. Because you have a scene, someone keeps messing up their line and then another actor's like, stop messing up the line. And then that actor's on edge and they're both. So there's a lot of things that can happen there, and having more time is honestly going to be a big solution to a lot of those things. So we're going through it. We got our scares. What would you think overall of the scares? Because I mean, looking back, I think, they really do hold up. So what were kind of your thoughts on the way that we executed with those scares, given how much attention we put into them?
I'd have to watch them again. I haven't watched Whitlow in a long time.
Well, for your super fans out there, we watch Whitlow together. So if you guys want to join us, we actually have Movie Mondays where you can join us on our Discord. Apparently Brendan doesn't watch his own movies because of that. But no, it definitely is something where it's been a while. I mean, I think, 2018 and all of this stuff. So I'm not surprised you don't have that vivid of a recall of it.
I mean, I would say most of them, to my recollection, were pretty quick scares. They were, people walking across like door frames, and I think we had a dream sequence. I remember being happy with them. I don't think they were anything too complicated, too crazy. I know the one that, that we had like the clown moving, that one never really hit too well. But I think the biggest problem with that movie was the lighting. And I'll talk about lighting all the time. Is it looked like a Hallmark movie. It was just very, very bright. And I think you lost a lot of atmosphere and tension. Instead of being a darkened house with all this creepy stuff around there, the house portion of it was very bright. And there was just, it just wasn't in the horror genre lighting style. And I think the warehouse looks completely different. The warehouse is actually really cool because there's no windows. So everything's lit by lanterns or the ambient light that we had in the warehouse. So I think a lot of the scares didn't necessarily work in the house because the lighting really couldn't build the tension that we wanted. And there's obviously just a lot of other stuff that, I could have done better to really draw out the tension and get the pops to hit. But I mean, for the most part, I think they were just cheap little pop scares. And I remember being pretty happy with them. So when I go back, I'll look at them. I'll probably hate all of them. But I think for, what we were trying to do, which is keep the viewer watching and going all the way through it. I think we did a good job.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, having watched it, I think 2 weeks ago we streamed it. It's something where it's your classic pop scares, and if anything, it's heavily on like volume. Like, these are ones where like we basically blow out your speaker. So like the first one where Tyler is actually the clown and he pops into you. And when we're watching with the super fans, I mean, they were definitely reacting to it. I think one of the hardest things is, as someone who's written it and did it and edited it, it's never going to hit as hard as you expect it to, because you've seen it so many times. So it is really good to get that feedback. And again, when I'm on set doing the editing, first thing I really look for is like, how do these scares cut together? So I thought the scares were really good. I do completely agree with you though. The intro and anything in the warehouse looks like a completely different movie. I thought we did really, I mean, again, it just needs a more grand approach to it, but we had a group of people. Shout out to a lot of my friends, Sean, Amanda, Alex, Taylor, really just a lot of people that we got to be our little crew of people going through the house. Again, I called in some friend cards. I was like, you guys will be famous. Trust me, we'll be big. And we're still working at it, so you still might be famous someday. But I think that really worked out well. And then we actually ended up, the only major pickup that we had is we basically created a fake haunted house in your office building. They had an abandoned floor to it. So you want to talk about that pickup? Because that was kind of the last step that we needed. And I feel like we had that planned from the beginning, or did we run out of time?
No, we never got the coverage. So to talk about my point earlier, the big thing with indies is you just don't have the coverage that you need. And in the script, I think the finale was like 20-25 minutes of just people going through the haunted house, getting killed. There's throat slits and all kinds of crazy stuff going on, smoke and lights and all this cool stuff. In my head, I was like, this is going to be sweet. 20 minutes of just pure chaos. And we had like security cameras, we had cell phone footage, we had, the cameras, the cinematic cameras. And, when we went down to edit it, I think we had like 8-minute, 7-minute sequence. So we're missing 12 minutes of footage. So we created a fake haunted house, and, we try to beef it up. And even with, doing the pickups, the biggest issue with Whitlow, I think, was just it needed a better ending. It needed 25 to 30 minutes of just pure chaos at the end. And this movie just ends too quickly. And I think the people who went around and watched it all the way through were disappointed with the end. Even if it is action packed, there is some cool shots, there's cool tension in there. And I like the suicide scene at the end. There just wasn't enough to get the payoff. I felt like I was like a little bit cheated. And usually that was the feedback that we got. It's like, man, we wish that there was just more to it. There was more, build up and action and gore, and it just needed to be leveled up a few times.
We didn't really quite get the amount of coverage that we wanted. And I think this is going to happen pretty much all the time. When you're an indie filmmaker, I think one of the biggest things that's going to happen when you sit down to edit is you're going to be like, wow, we just don't have as much to work with as we thought.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think getting proper coverage is difficult in itself. And most indie films will have some kind of issues with either audio or color correction or just the shots themselves. So it took us probably, I would say the first film that I felt comfortable with our coverage was the last one we did, The Murder House, which is coming out soon. Girl in Cabin 13, I felt really good with it, but there were some times where we were like falling back on literally the last take, or we had one take to use in that film. So I wouldn't say it was complete coverage, but the last one we did, we had a ton of multiple shots, multiple angles. And when you have complete coverage and you have the ability to work with the coverage, you're not limited. So you have the ability to change and manipulate the pace of the movie, which is why you see a lot of indie films are either very, very short, or they have like weird pacing moments where, because they're the lack of footage or the lack of coverage, they have to pick it up later on in the movie to get to the hour 15, hour 20 mark. So you kind of get these like long drawn out scenes, or they'll add in scenes through pickups. And all this is stuff you want to avoid. So making sure you're getting proper coverage and you're getting enough material when you head into post is crucial for any indie filmmaker.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think this is, again, editing is where the fun happens in the worst sense of the way, because it really is like a puzzle for a lot of indie filmmakers. Just like you said, I really don't think we had enough coverage until The Haunting of the Murder House, which is the newest one, in the sense that it almost felt like, how do you scrap this scene versus how does this scene naturally flow? And I think more than not, what will happen is a good percentage, like you said, of the footage just will not be usable, so you toss that out the door. Not only is that, but you got to think how many of the takes where you're not happy with what the actors were doing, so you toss those out the ability to use them too. And you're left with such little time, like moments, that you almost find yourself working scenes together, hopping back and forth, and really just scraping together and scrapping something that is able to actually just get the point across. And that's the goal, is just at least have something. And I think that is something that you'll end up having and encountering as any filmmaker, especially an indie filmmaker with limited budgets, because again, time is money on set, and you just really don't have the luxury of being able to have that much coverage. So coverage is going to be one of the biggest issues going into post. And what was different with post is this was the first movie that we both started getting into more on the editing process. And now really it's me and my brother bouncing back and forth different edits and cuts, to get to the finished product. But it really kind of spun off of, we did a lot of the trailer edits and we did some editing in the unseen, but we were just in Premiere now. And, again, if you just get into an editing software and you just start playing around with it, before you know it, you'll just kind of level up with what you're doing. So I think it started with like little things here and there, pacing wise, in the unseen. Then I was doing the editing on set for the Whitlow house, so I kind of had something together. But do you think that was the first time where we really started taking the editing process more in-house?
Yeah, I would think so. This one started with the same editor who did The Invited. And, he had a conversation with me saying, technically, this movie was very difficult to work with, just because there's a lot of technical issues with the movie. There were shots that were a little bit out of focus. There was a lot of grain in the movie. There were some shots that were just falling apart. We had an issue with one of the sensors on the camera. So there was like a green light or green hue in some of the shots. So there was just a lot of stuff. The audio wasn't very good in this movie. There's a lot of issues. And, the editor was good because he did a great job with The Invited, but it was getting to the point where he was just getting stuck on a lot of these technical things. And we just needed to essentially scrape it together and just try and get a movie, get a finished product. So, within working with him, I started working on, some of the pacing stuff. We try to, stack the movie together on the timeline to try and get it to flow a little bit better, just so we can get to the point where the people who knew what they were doing as far as like audio and color correction can actually start to work on the project. Because when you're hiring someone else, they have other projects they're working on. And anytime you add another person in the production line, you're expanding your timeline. So everything's going to take longer to get to. When it's just you working on it, or you or one or two people, the timelines condense. And, our first three movies, they took a long time to go through post-production. And I see this a lot with indie films, where it'll take 6 months to a year, because they're going through various editors. They're going through various problems, essentially. They have to hire a color person, and they have to hire someone to do the audio. So the more people you have in there, the longer it's going to take. especially if you have issues that, if you're going frame by frame to fix problems or to remove people from windows or to clean up audio, all this is going to take a long time. So I think this was kind of a moment where we didn't fully start editing the movie ourselves, but we started to dive into the process. And I started to learn Premiere just to, help out the editor and be like, all right, look, I see what you're trying to do here. Let's try and switch things up here, put a montage here, cut it this way. So I was working actively on the cuts and just doing that instead of, giving notes as feedback and being like, here, this seems too slow. I can actually go in there and edit the scene myself and send it back to them, to give them an idea of what I essentially wanted. Was it any good? Probably not, but it's, going from good to better to best. Good would be just giving him solid notes. Better was what I was doing, which is giving him something that he could look at, something he could open the Premiere project file and, see what I'm trying to do. And best would honestly just be editing it myself to the point where, I was satisfied with what was going on in real time.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical thing. And kind of going back to, there's a lot of issues with the footage. That's going to happen, period. That's just going to happen on a set. No matter what, there's things that you don't catch in the moments. There's issues you don't even see or hear. You can do everything you can to prevent it. But again, you're running around, you're filming, you're already behind on set, you're doing all of these things. You have to literally expect that there's going to be a good amount of footage going into post, which again goes back to the coverage thing. So that is going to happen, and what you were saying is really something that I think is critical. You really have to be the driving force for your movie, and anytime you pass off your movie to someone else, you are going ahead and basically being on their timeline. What are their motivations for it? And it's a lot easier to say, hey, this footage is just really terrible, than, okay, this footage is rough right now, but what is the process that we do to fix this? How do we think creatively? I mean, honestly, the movies, like all of them, pretty much until, Girl in Cabin 13 and afterwards, like you said, the coverage, just because of multiple reasons and indie film things that happened, just wasn't there. So if you weren't approaching it with the mentality of, I need to make this work versus, I can't use this, it's night and day difference. And it's my big recommendation, really take a look at editing. And it's not that hard. There's so many videos for it. It is tedious, it is time consuming, and I think a lot of people don't like it for those reasons. But by far the best skill that I think you can get as a filmmaker is editing, simply because if you can edit a movie together, that's the hardest part. And if you just engineer backwards from that, and what's a good film, what's good coverage to have so that I can edit this, what's a good story that I can get good coverage to edit it, that's the process that I think will be the most successful. So jumping into the editing stuff, I think, is really critical. I remember this was the first time where, like, I put together like the front intro. I was just working on the intro because I was kind of hooked, and again, I was doing the day zero edits, or the on-site edits. So I was basically making my little timeline, and for the most part, I got like the first half of the movie done. And what I was excited about is, I remember when we saw the first rough, and I was like, oh wow, like, it's my scenes. And I think something that might end up happening too is you might get in your head that, like, oh, I'm not really a professional editor. But I think that's almost like an imposter syndrome type thing, where give it a shot. It's really not as difficult as you think, and there's a lot of ways to do it. So do you want to touch on just kind of, jumping in and editing your first movie as an indie filmmaker?
Yeah, I think Premiere, it looks complicated, but once you kind of figure out like what the hotkeys do and what each button does, it's pretty much drag and drop. And I think the skill that comes with editing is, I have a scene in my head and I know the coverage that I have. And so I can kind of put that together without like trial and error now. I could cut a scene together very, very quickly. And I think that's just the skill of having hours and hours and hours of Premiere, where when I first started, it just took a while to try and figure out the flow and, what's going to cut together properly. But the good news with Whitlow was our DP was very good on the shoot. So we did have a pretty good amount of coverage to work with. So we were able to scrap a lot of the stuff together. The technical issues really were kind of overblown. and we were able to get a finished product. Now, was it like, do we have to scrap and, pull little pieces from clips when we weren't even, yelling action? It was like before we even, we just started rolling, and it's before we started saying action. We were pulling little clips from, different like clips like that. But we got it together, and that's a testament, because there's a lot of indie films that they'll get to a certain scene and they'll just be stuck. They just don't have enough coverage. They don't have enough footage to essentially scrap it together. So, this was the first movie working with a new DP, and I thought he did a great job. And we had enough going into post-production to make a finished product, which is just, a blessing in itself.
No, I completely agree. I mean, that is something I think you really need to look at it, not so much as, oh, why was there issues like that? That's a problem. There's going to be issues, especially on this budget level. And definitely it was a testament to our DP for his ability to go ahead and, really make that, that work and come together. I mean, Enendar did a great job of getting all of the footage and the coverage and everything there. He was working probably like 14 hours straight, so I mean, like, he killed himself in that shoot, and he got a ton of footage for us. And we, like I said, or like you said, it was able to make the movie, and that's the end goal of it. What happened though is what happens with every single indie film is you're gonna run into issues. I think one of the biggest things too is people who go through the editing process will never look at a movie the same, because I think what ends up happening is people brush over that process and they almost assume that like the film is ready, done, and it was always supposed to be like that. So if a scene looks weird, well, that scene was just filmed weird and it was supposed to be like that. It's kind of jumping to this plot point and it seems off. Well, it was probably always supposed to do that. When in reality, this is every single movie from indie budget to Hollywood movie goes through this scrap session of what works, what doesn't work. And it's something where that's really where the magic happens, is in the editing, because that is your final product. And in the editing booth, you have so much control. So if you kind of think you get a different perspective in movies after you go through an editing process.
I think so. And especially when I'm watching indie films, I see like a weird cut or a jump cut or a random insert. Before I was editing, I would have never noticed that. But now I see and I'm like, oh, they probably didn't have like a smooth transition there, or they're missing something here. Or, when they run audio over with the reaction shot of another actor, usually there was something wrong with that take. But the difference is with a larger budget in a Hollywood film, they're getting like literally 15 to 20 takes. They only have to shoot a page a day. And we're shooting, 12 to 14 pages a day. We're running gun. So if you're a DP on an indie shoot, is extremely, extremely difficult, just to get the shots in that you need and to make the schedule that you've planned. So I think having a DP that can get as much coverage in as little time really saves you in the editing room. Even if, like, my main thing I would say would be to just keep the camera rolling at all times, because we're pulling pieces left and right from just little scenes. I remember in The Girl in Cabin 13, we had just a random shot where I think I just left the camera running, and we pulled some scenes of like Frank and the other masked men out there that we used in the film. So I'd always say, just keep the camera running. But I mean, your DP, you really have to rely heavily on the DP. And I really think that our DP on this film really saved it. I think if we were to use another DP, or someone who wasn't able to get as much coverage, because we only shot for 6 days on this one, I think we would have been in a lot of trouble. And if we didn't have Enendari, I don't think this would have been a finished movie.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is back to the testament of how important it is to have a good crew. Because like we said in the first part, there was no running water, there was no air conditioning, there was so many things that just made this set so difficult to film, and that's going to happen. And on top of that, just those things alone, whatever the environment is, having those things is bad. And on top of that, I need 8 to 14 pages from you. And this is, again, run and gun, where, we were really, really in his hands, and he did a fantastic job in being able to get us to that next level. I mean, honestly, all of our crews that we've always worked with have just been completely amazing, because this is really, really hard. I just want to get that across, that most of these movies, most indie movies, never see the light of day. And the biggest testament is getting across the finish line, accepting the compromises that you need to do and getting through the editing process. So now I remember, as we were kind of working through the editing process, it was still something where, for me at least, at the time, I was still pretty impressed with the progress that we had made. Again, you start seeing the flaws, you start seeing the errors, you start seeing where it's slow and the pacing and like the issues. But it was also something where, like, to me now, we're seeing that outline of what a DBS story kind of is, where you have these almost set checkpoints in the beats, and we're actually hitting them. Where I think the first three, each had their own unique issue, but from here we kind of almost started coloring within the lines that we're setting. Do you think that was something that was popping up in the editing process for you?
Yeah, I think I would separate our movies into little tranches. I would say Gone, Invited, and Unseen were the first um, pretty much minimal viable products. We were still trying, I was still trying to just make a movie and see if we can upload it and gather feedback and try and, refine the process. Whitlow was the first time, from a top down perspective, I try to refine how we shot things, the coverage that we got, and like the audio and the video elements of the shoot. So I think Whitlow was the first one where I think everyone on the team and the people who understand indie films, they saw the potential that we had in this film. It still was a little bit early before we can actually get feedback from other people who don't watch indie films, because there was a lot of technical issues still with this movie. We had a lot of audio issues, and that kind of took away from their feedback. So they were focusing more on the technical issues. So we weren't able to really get solid feedback from people who weren't watching indie films. But the people who were involved in this process, and myself and, my team, this was the first one where you saw like a glimmer of potential. The story was well executed. The pacing was done very, very well. And I thought that if we just cleaned up like some of the audio issues that we had, and, we just worked a little bit more on the coverage that we got, and, clean up our editing, I think you could see that we were making a lot of progress. And I remember when we uploaded Whitlow, when we finished Whitlow, I was very happy with how everything turned out. And this is still, to this day, my favorite DBS film of the Hateful Eight, followed closely by The Morgan Estate.
Yeah, and it really is something where I think it was a big milestone for us. It was that pivotal point where I think multiple things kind of happened on it, where, we're more in the editing process, which, again, in my opinion, is the most important factor. Like, really, I think that is so critical. As the best thing you can do as a filmmaker is really get in detail with just being an editor and getting that final product across. Because I think one of the biggest issues in the creative industry is just getting things done. And, it's really is a monumental task on any project. So I think that was kind of, us getting into that, but also us understanding, like you said, everything, the script elements of it, because that was kind of the first thing that we had our hands on, was the script. But now we're more active in the script. It was the first time where, really kind of understanding filming too. Like you said, we were able to get that coverage. So while we did have a great DP, you had your shot list, the writer had the shot list with it. We were able to get the coverage that you knew we needed because of the past experience. So to me, Whitlow was that first time, we had those movies completed, that you just started to understand how the industry worked. And it was almost like that turning point, which really allowed us to build on our next movie. So we finally got the edit, we uploaded it. It's still one of my favorites, out there. I think, to me, it's a good story. It's a great indie story. Like, it's perfectly done there. It did need just a few little things there, but it's definitely a favorite. So let's talk about, hey, we got the movie, but what's the important part now? How do we make money off of it? So we're going into the process again of, uploading it with Amazon. What was your feelings at this point in time? Because everything's an ebb and flow when it comes to the movie industry.
Well, we were hot off of Unseen, which did very, very well. And I felt comfortable with this one. I thought it was paced very well. There wasn't a ton of, in the finished product, there wasn't a ton of issues. I thought we were able to scrap it together. I thought all the editors that worked on this project did a great job. I thought, the DP did a great job. And when we uploaded it, it did very well. I mean, it was a typical indie movie pacing where it just started and it didn't stop. There's very little downbeats. The only downbeat that was really in there was the pizza and beer scene, where it was heavy character development. That lost a lot of people. And I think if we would have just cut that or pulled away from that scene a little bit, it probably would have made even more money. But overall, it was a very good movie, a strong success. And I can't remember how quickly it made its money, but it was definitely within 3 months it made its money back. And it's still chugging along today. It's still doing very well. I think it has like a little bit of a cult following. So I would definitely like to revisit this movie again, knowing what I know now and knowing that it just needs a little bit more love as far as like a budget goes. And it needs just more love as far as the climax just needs to be crazier. And if we can make this movie grittier, crazier, and I talked about it before, if we can raise the stakes for the couple, I think you have a very solid movie that would, perform really well on Shudder or Netflix, or some, streaming channel.
Yeah, it really is kind of a testament to just everything that was put together, and that's such an indie film. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like as we get better at the process, we're going through the loopholes, but that was almost like the right amount of challenge. No water, no AC, weird environment, good crew. That was really one of those where you'll never forget. I mean, you won't forget any film set, but Whitlow is definitely one that was just such a unique case there. Now, as we always mention, it is super important that you guys remember to market your movies in the sense of making sure you split test your titles and your posters. I do just want to touch on it again. We touched on it last time, but it was not The Haunting of the Whitlow House. It was actually the first time The Haunting came about, that term. So you just want to hop in about the split testing, just the process of getting the movie ready. What does that look like? And what are the steps that an indie filmmaker should be doing to get your movie market ready for the upload?
Yeah, I think you should be split testing everything. I mean, it's critical to make sure that you have key art in your cover that appeals to the most people. You have a blurb that appeals to the people who like your cover. And you have essentially a title that catches people's attention, but not only catches their attention, you have the ability to remember the name of the movie. There's a lot of indie movies out there with really weird titles, and I try to recommend it to a friend, and I can't remember the name of the movie. So you want to have something unique. I think for the Whitlow House, we knew that was going to be a good one, but I still split tested 150 different titles. We have a graphic design team that made probably 200 to 250 movie posters. And the blurb, we split tested probably 100, different blurbs. And I see it all the time with indie films. They skimp on a professional like cover or key art movie poster. If you do that, if the first thing I'm streaming through or scanning through movies on Amazon, I'm going to pick the ones that look professional, because I feel like if they have a professional movie poster, they probably have a professional movie. And if if you skimp on that and you don't pay the graphic designers the proper amount, you're already shooting yourself in the foot. And as far as blurbs go, you really want to hone in on what your audience is looking for in a movie. We knew we wanted horror people. We made it very clear that they're buying a haunted house and, bad things are going to happen. I see a lot of blurbs that are super long. They're super vague. It could be a sci-fi, drama, romance movie. And I'm just like, this is too confusing. I don't want to watch this. The best converting blurbs are ones that are 3 or 4 sentences long, that are a little bit vague, but you're hitting your target audience. If your target audience is horror people, make it very clear that this is a horror movie. This is what's going to happen. They're moving into a haunted house and bad things are going to happen. We're not, telling you 10 different lines of the backstory of the characters or anything like that. Because the more you tell them before they start watching the movie, the more they're just going to go on to the next movie if they don't agree with any of the sentences that you have. So I think split testing, all that stuff is super important. It helps the distributor, it helps yourself. And I think it's very, very overlooked in the indie community, because by the time you get to this point, you're out of money and you're tired and you just want to upload it. But you can really help yourself out with a really, really good cover and a really, really good blurb, and also a title that people can remember.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to give you an idea of the blurb, 2 passionate entrepreneurs sink all of their resources into a haunted house with the hope of turning it into a profitable horror attraction. The young couple soon realizes that the horrific stories surrounding the house's sinister history are not only true, but deadly. So right there, exactly what it is. You get the plot in the beginning, and then you get a little vague. It's true, but deadly. And we split tested all of those. Now, if I'm an indie filmmaker, like you said, I'm exhausted. I'm like, oh man, how do I get this thing out of there? All of those things you just said, wow, I don't have the ability to pay a graphics team. I don't have the ability to do all of these things. So walk me through on scale, because the thing is, we both have a marketing background with what we do. So we're really in detail of split testing, A/B analysis, all of these different things that just come from business naturally. But let's look at what's the micro budget way of doing it. Because again, you can look at multiple budgets to get something done, but what would you say would be the shoestrings budget that we would give an indie filmmaker?
So here's how you do it. $10 a day on Facebook ads for your title. Create 100 titles, ask your friends for feedback, try and make as many as you can. Go on IMDb and look at similar movies, get 100 titles, put them all on one ad set. You run it for $10 a day for 4 days. You'll figure out which one wins very, very quickly. For blurbs, do the same thing. Test long ones, test short ones, look at other films for inspiration. That takes $10 a day, $30 in total. You'll know a good blurb. Like one will rise to the top. For key art and your cover art, it's a little bit different. I've been using 99 Designs, and I would recommend them because I think it's like $400 we pay, but we get like 200 different designs. People love trying to make horror movies or horror movie posters. So for $400, you're getting 200 designs. As they come through, I'm putting them on Facebook. I spend $10 a day. And I think like in 99 Designs, it lasts maybe 4 or 5 days. So it's $40 a split testing, $400 for the poster, and they're all great. All this stuff is excellent. And at the end of that, so you're looking at maybe $500 in total. And I'm telling you, your best return on investment is doing this $500, because you're going to get people to go to your movie to see it, and you're going to get organic traffic. If you don't have any known stars in your movie, you have to do this. You will not be able to move the movie. But there's also other benefits, as in I get contacted by distributors all the time because they're like, I liked your cover art. I like your blurb. I think, this is a good fit for your, for our company. We had 10 to 15 distribution offers on Cabin 13, just unsolicited. Now, were they good offers? I don't know. We didn't go with an unsolicited offer, but you could help yourself out by doing that. The only other thing I would say that you need a split test is your trailer. You have to make sure you have a good trailer. So me and Kel, we chop up about 25, 30 different trailers. We spend $5 a day. We pick the ones that, essentially win the Facebook battle. And you can also ask your friends for feedback, but you really want to tone in and dial in on people who are watching horror movies on AVOD platforms. So Tubi, Amazon Prime, and we target people who watch Shudder as well. Because Shudder, the people who watch Shudder know horror and they have a good palette for the horror and the direction that we're trying to go for.
Yeah, and again, as you mentioned, that is going to be the best investment that you can do here. And at the end of the day, if your movie doesn't recoup your money, it's going to be hard to make another movie. So all of those things that, you mentioned, I would say 500 is kind of the good amount to do it, but you can do all of that for 100. You could do all of it for 50. It's very flexible. Running Facebook ads, setting them up, you should have a Facebook page in general. It's super easy to do. There's a reason they're worth so much money, because they instantly give you that access to test things. And to give you an idea, when we go through the trailer process, we always we have a little competitive battle of who can get the lowest clicks, and you can get them down to 1, 2, 3 cents. Here's the thing, our worst performing one was 30 cents and the best performing one was like 1 cent. Some of them are in the dollar range. So to give you that idea, just by doing a few things, you can clearly see that one of these sets is going to be 100, 200, 300, even 1,000 times better based on all of the multiplications of going through the process of split titling the cover, the blurb. All of those things are compounding to give you the best chance to get eyeballs on your movie. And that's the hardest part nowadays. It's honestly no longer hard to make and finish a movie with all of the technology out there and all of the lessons. The hard part is, how do you get this made movie out there so that people can watch it when you're competing against so many other movies, so many other things, different platforms, TikTok, all of those things add up, and it makes it super, super difficult. So that's really one of the more important things. Always consider your marketing, always have something set aside, and really understand that there is that fourth step in the filmmaking process, which is the marketing and the efforts you put in there. You just nowadays have to push for it. So that's going to go ahead and wrap us up for the second part of this episode. Again, please go ahead, check out the Whitlow House. It's one of our favorites, as we mentioned. You can also go ahead, find us on different platforms. We have a YouTube channel, podcast, TikTok, our Discord channel is where I would highly recommend you to check out, because you can actually become a super fan of ours. And what does that mean? You just get a whole bunch of perks and benefits. You get your name in the movies. You get to watch our movies before they come out to give us feedback. It's just a really, really cool group. So I highly recommend that if this is kind of your thing. Where we're going to go after this is our next two movies were found footage. So we will be talking about Into the Forest, and we are excited to give you the pros and cons of what it's like, because found footage is definitely something you see a ton in indie film. So until next week, we'll see you again.